Welcome to today's studio sessions. I am unlocking a retiring course and sharing an edited version of this mixed media floral bouquet in a crock. I hope you enjoy it. The first thing we're going to do to get started is lay down our table. And to do that, I'm using Roycycle decoupage tissue. It is called Trolley Crate or Crate Trolley. And what I want to do is just choose a piece that I think I would like to be on my table. I'm just choosing a bottom piece. For my table, I like to angle it, and you'll notice that in the example, but you could certainly go straight across. When you have your design in place, you just want to leave a little bit of paper over the edge, and you can use your fingers to create a crease and get just the part that you want. And then we're going to apply it with our decoupage medium. As you go along, brushing this off in small sections at a time, you can smooth it over with your fingers, offload your decoupage medium away from the crease, and then work towards that. Working in just a small section is much easier, and it can also allow you an opportunity to address any sides or corners. Corners are always the hardest to get down. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and seal it. We'll let it dry, and then once it's dry, we'll be ready to sand off the edges. Once your paper is dry, it's time to sand off the edges. It's really important to move your sandpaper in a downward direction instead of back and forth or side to side. It'll ensure that you have less tearing in your paper. And if any of your edges, because we're working on canvas, are a little rough, don't worry about that at all. We'll address that as we apply paint and go through this process. And we'll use other mediums to take care of that. So here I'm just going around in just all over the edges in a downward motion. I'm using, I believe it's a 220 grit sandpaper, and that's a good grit to use for this. Now it's time to begin to create our background for our floral arrangement. And I do this by beginning with black. It adds a lot of depth, even under the other colors that we'll be using. I'm using acrylic paint that I purchased in the art department, but you should feel free to use craft paints, chalk paint, whatever paint you have on hand. I happen to like the acrylics for this, but it's not necessary. Again, just use any black that you would like. See that I'm going in a very random fashion. This creates a lot of texture and movement, especially if you're not using a self-leveling paint. Next, I'm going to be adding a second color. I believe this one is the dark titanium white. I'll be using both white and the dark titanium white over this. I'm mixing them, and you can see that I'm just rolling it on with a brayer. The more random, the better. You can get even higher contrast by allowing your paint to dry just a little bit before applying other colors. You'll see that here I'm just going wet on wet, and so it takes a little bit longer and a little bit more paint to get the contrast that I'm looking for. Again, just very random fashion. The brayer makes it super easy. And then once all of your paint is applied and you're happy with your background, we're just going to let this dry completely before we move on to the next step. Now we're ready to lay down our floral arrangement. And the first thing you want to do is select the stamps that you want to use. I'm using several flowers from the Chrysanthemum stamp set by Orchid Designs, and I'm also using one element from the Sunflower set. You want to kind of lay down your stamps on your canvas uninked, just to get an idea of how you want to apply them. Once you have an arrangement in place, it's a good idea to take a picture of that with your phone. Referring to the picture on your phone, you want to go ahead and lay down your arrangement. All we're doing right now is building the shape of our floral arrangement. We'll take one stamp at a time. referring to our picture, and then stamp each of those images into our arrangement. We're not masking now, we're doing nothing but laying down our floral arrangement. We will be adding other elements later, but right now what we're doing is we're just getting these flowers in place again, just to give our basic shape of our floral arrangement. Now that we have the shape of our bouquet, we are going to be using white liquid gesso. Gesso works as a primer. It also allows us to prepare our bouquet to receive watercolor paint. So we are just going along the outline of each of our flowers and painting in the center. Believe it or not, we're going to be restamping this, and you'll see how easy it is to do. But this step is definitely necessary in order for your bouquet to receive the watercolor paints. Once you have everything painted in, then you're going to let this dry and we'll be ready for the next step. There may be some areas where you feel you need 2 coats, and you can certainly do that. Now that our bouquet is ready to receive watercolor, it's time to restamp this. And this is the really important part, because we want to think of how our flowers are going to be laid out. What petals are behind others, which ones are in the front. And so I know in this bouquet that I want these 2 blooms on the side toward the bottom to be in front of the other blooms. So those are the ones that I'm going to stamp first. I'm inking up my stamp with IOD's black ink, and then just lining that stamp up with my gesso outline. I'm going to repeat this on the other side, doing the same thing. The outline will really help you line up your petals. And now we're giving each of our flowers definition, and we're putting them in place in the order of arrangement that we would like to have happen. We're going to be working a lot with masks. Most of the stamp sets that come from IOD will include masks. And what this does, it allows you to stamp an image, but whatever image you have masked will be front and center. So instead of stamping over our blooms like we did before, we're using masks to actually protect them. So I'm lining this one up and stamping just as I did. And now you'll see when we remove the mask that that bloom is behind the one that we wanted in front. Now that our bouquet is in place, it's time to create our crock. I like to use a ruler and a small piece of chalk. It's easily erasable, or you're able to paint over it. So lining up my ruler with the bottom of my canvas, I'm just going to create a line to where I think I would like the bottom of my crock to sit. And then I'm going to do this on the other side. You are able to make your crock as wide or as narrow as you would like. Once those lines are in place, you're going to draw a line with just the slightest curve underneath, just to join those other 2 lines. This will be filled in with gesso before we begin watercolor painting. Now that these sprigs, once they're drawn and you have them in place where you would like them, then your crock and the sprigs are going to be filled in with gesso, the white gesso, just like we did on the bouquet. We are finally ready to watercolor. Yay! I really like to start with my leaves. I don't know why. And so I'm not going to talk too much through this. I just want to let you know that this is the part where all the creativity comes out, And I like to start with my leaves for some reason. It just gives me some separation and just kind of an anchor. You will notice as we go throughout this that I am going to be working with just a limited selection. I'm using greens in my bouquet, and I'm using reds and purples and oranges, and I'm going to be mixing all of those colors. I will not be painting any bloom just a single color. I will go back in once, twice, three times, maybe even four with more color, a different color, mixing colors, all of that. Here I started with just kind of a darker green, and then I added something bright. Now you can see I'm adding a little bit of brown. Every bit of it just gives interest and shading and depth to your watercolor painting. The more water you use, the lighter it's going to be. The less water you use, the darker it's going to be, or the more concentrated in color. So play and mix colors and just have the best time with this. This is the most fun part of the entire process. And I hope it's as relaxing for you as it is for me. It's time to paint our flowers. So just like we did with the leaves, I'm going to be using just a few colors and mixing them in different ways for each of my flowers. I'll be using reds and oranges and purples. And again, adding more water will create something lighter. Adding less water will create more concentrated color. And I'm going to start with one bloom at a time. And I may choose to fill in a leaf, or I may choose to just run a streak of color through a leaf. But however you decide to do it, just enjoy the process. Here I'm just adding this kind of rosy red, and then I'll be coming back with other colors. You should be able to see a lot of the colors that I'm putting on my palette. And again, out of 72 colors, I really am using maybe 5 or 6. And just by mixing them and blending them, we're creating a lot of shading and depth and interest into our florals. The next step is to age our crock. I'm using the burnt umber and a lot of water, and I'm also mixing it in with my titanium white. And just like we did before, we're going to go around our petals. I'm using a kind of a flat angled artist brush to do this. We're just going to be adding burnt umber to it, mixing in a little of the titanium white, and this is just going to create an antiquing effect. And you just keep working with this until it's pleasing to you. Now what we're going to do is give some movement to our table, and we're using a palette knife and that same burnt umber paint. And what we're doing is by running a line of paint across it, we're creating an illusion of planks. It also adds interest and makes it more of a realistic looking table. Next, we're going to be adding the stamping. We're going to be using Crackle as well as Stays On ink in brown. This is a permanent solvent-based ink, and I'm using it because IOD doesn't really have a brown ink. So the first thing that I'm going to do is add my Crackle. This is just a piece of Crackle stamp that I've cut from a larger stamp. I like to cut them with curves, leaving one straight edge, but working with smaller pieces is great for this type of project. I'm just gently using bits and pieces of that stamp, holding it above in areas, using the whole thing in others. And I'm not even using a thin mount with this. I'm just using this with my hand, just randomly applying Crackle. Next, we're going to go ahead and stamp our number. This is a stamp from the letterpress stamp by Orchid Designs. I'm just going to position that where I want it, using a thin mount to apply it. And now our crock is complete. This is a completely optional step, as I mentioned in the before you begin of this section, but what we are doing is adding even more color to our background. And we're doing this by using an acrylic color called cerulean blue. It's very bright. I don't want you to be afraid of this step. We are mixing it with our other colors that we've used, such as the black, the dark titanium white, the titanium white as well. We're creating new colors by mixing the cerulean blue into one of those three colors. And we are just randomly applying the color. And again, we're using a small brush to go around our floral arrangement. And then we're filling in. We will be softening this entire palette of our background with glazes and pastels in the next step, so don't be afraid. Now that our canvas is dry, we've sprayed it outdoors and the workable fixative is dry, we're going to soften the background using glazes. I'm first using Wise Owl's glaze in whitewash. I'm using it full strength. It's a good idea to wear gloves because the glaze can stick to your hands and you may not like that. I'm using just a lint-free piece of a t-shirt and just applying it all over my background. I'm dabbing in some areas, wiping in others, and it really, you can see how it's beginning to soften the brightness of our background. You can go over your decoupage paper with this. You could go over your florals, but for the most part, I'm avoiding the florals and just applying the glaze to my background. Next, I'm going to do the same process, but I'm using mortar glaze. And for this, I'm using just a little sponge dauber. I dip it in, wipe some off on a paper towel, and then just dab it. The glazes are beautiful because they are transparent. They add a little bit of color, but they just give a beautiful translucency to the background. And by adding the different colors of the glaze, it just adds more depth and dimension to your background. Our final glaze is going to be Wise Owl's charcoal glaze. I'm using a clean sponge dauber and I'm just adding a little bit of the charcoal glaze. This gives just a little bit of contrast to the lighter colors. It adds shading. And again, just like we did the other, I'm applying it with a sponge dauber. A final way to add a little bit more texture and interest or a little grunge is to use a product called soft pastels. They feel like chalk, they add color, and the nice thing about using them on this project is that the texture in the canvas allows these chalk pastels just to kind of glide. I'm using three colors. I'm using a charcoalish color, a white color, and a little bit of a brown and a gray. So I guess that's really 4 colors. I like to go ahead and apply it, just gliding it with a very soft touch and using a paper towel or something like that just to blend them a little bit. Then on my table surface, I'm going to add a little shadowing to one side using a brown and just adding a little bit of the soft pastels to various areas of my table just to finish that. I so hope you enjoyed this project. Let me know what your favorite part is and join me next Tuesday for another studio sessions at 2. Happy creating.